the ultimate deathworlder test. The Galactic survival trials were designed to be a definitive, mathematical end to arrogance. Held on Oros 4, a jagged, atmospheric wasteland of toxic mist, tectonic instability, and a local fauna population classified primarily as things that want to dissolve you. The trial was meant for the galaxy's toughest recruits. Heavy worlders from high-gravity star systems, scaled behemoths from the sulfur-crust ridges of the outer rim, and elite imperial commandos all arrived at the drop zone clad in multi-layered, powered tactical armor dripping with force field generators, environmental HUDs, and emergency beacon transmitters. And then there was Miller. Miller, the sole human cadet admitted to the Academy under the new Cross-Species Integration Initiative, stood at the edge of the drop ship's ramp wearing a faded canvas utility vest, a pair of worn canvas trousers, and sturdy leather boots that had seen significantly better decades. In his left hand, he carried a heavy-duty, dented green metal cylinder attached to a two-burner camping stove. In his right hand, resting casually over his shoulder like a baseball bat, was a 15-inch cast-iron skillet seasoned to a carbonized, non-stick perfection that defied modern metallurgy. High Instructor Kalen, a towering avian veteran with razor-sharp plumage and an expression of perpetual disappointment, swooped down to inspect the human before the drop hatch sealed. "Cadet Miller," Kalen squawked, his translation implant humming with sharp condescension. "Where is your localized atmospheric scrubber? Where is your kinetic deflection harness? Where is your tactical survival pack?" Miller blinked, shifting the cast-iron skillet to his other hand and offering a slow, easygoing grin. "Left him in my quarters, Chief," Miller said cheerfully. "Too much dead weight. If you're running from a predator or trying to boil water before dark, you don't want to be lugging 50 pounds of titanium battery packs." Kalen's crest flared in utter disbelief. "This is not a camping excursion, human. Oros 4 possesses a Class-9 biosphere. The atmosphere will sear human lungs within 90 seconds of exposure. The local predators hunt via thermal signature, and the terrain changes dynamically due to subterranean magma venting. You will not survive 30 minutes without a full tactical envelope." "I've camped in worse," Miller muttered, pulling a small box of wooden matches from his breast pocket and rattling them. "Besides, I promised my buddy back on Earth I'd bring home some authentic xenomorph pelt for a garage rug. See you at the extraction point in 3 days." Before Kalen could issue a disciplinary reprimand or trigger the mandatory safety expulsion, the dropship ramp dropped completely, and Miller stepped casually out into the howling, toxic gale of Oros 4. 72 hours later, the observation deck of the Academy orbital station was dead silent. High Instructor Kalen and a dozen senior military strategists stood shoulder to shoulder in front of the master tactical display, staring at the telemetry feeds in a state of clinical shock. On the central monitor, Sector 7 of the survival zone, a notoriously lethal basin known as the ash sinks, was currently bathed in a warm, flickering orange glow that had nothing to do with magma venting. Kalen tapped the intercom. "Drone Cam 4, magnify and enhance." The holographic image zoomed in past the jagged rock formations, clearing the swirling toxic fog to reveal a surreal scene. In the center of a cleared patch of scorched earth sat Miller's battered propane camping stove, hissing softly on a medium flame. Resting squarely on the burners was the heavy cast-iron skillet, inside of which several thick slabs of locally sourced, aggressively marinated tentacle meat were sizzling with a rich, aromatic intensity that made the automated environmental scrubbers on the drone register conflicting flavor profile alerts. Miller sat comfortably on an overturned boulder nearby, whittling a piece of driftwood with a pocket knife. Directly behind him, curled up like a giant, domesticated hound dog, was an apex predator known as a gorgonstalker, a 12-foot-long, multi-limbed nightmare creature with razor-sharp mandibles and armor plating capable of deflecting a light plasma rifle. Right now, the apex predator was resting its massive, terrifying head on its front paws, whining softly and staring hungrily at the frying pan like a golden retriever waiting for a piece of bacon. "Explain this," whispered Supreme Commander Varus, his multifaceted eyes wide as saucers. "That creature, that is a Class-9 carnivore. It eats armor plates for breakfast. Why is it behaving like a domestic pet?" Kalen swallowed hard, pulling up the audio logs from the drone. "Who's a good multi-dimensional horror, then?" Miller's voice echoed softly through the tactical speakers as he flipped a sizzling strip of meat with a pair of metal tongs. "Yeah, you want a little piece of garlic butter? You wait till the edges get crispy, buddy. Don't crowd the pan." The Gorgon stalker let out a low, rumbling purr that rattled the ground sensors 3 kilometers away and gently nudged Miller's knee with its massive snout. Kalen stared at the screen, his feathers drooping in profound, existential defeat. "The Deathworlder test," Kalen murmured quietly to the assembly of commanders, "was designed to test endurance against the harshness of the universe. We completely failed to account for a species that responds to planetary hostility by setting up a patio grill and making friends with the local apex predator." On the monitor, Miller looked up directly into the lens of the overhead surveillance drone, raised his tin mug of dark, bitter coffee and a silent toast, and winked. High Instructor Kalen stood frozen in front of the master tactical display, his beak parted in a silent, permanent gasp of disbelief. Beside him, Supreme Commander Varus slowly reached out, pressed a button on the console, and rewound the drone footage by 30 seconds to verify that his optic receptors weren't malfunctioning. On the screen, the 12-foot-long, multi-limbed Gorgon stalker let out another low, subaudible purr that caused the atmospheric pressure sensors on the drone to flicker wildly. Miller casually flipped a strip of sizzling tentacle meat in the cast-iron skillet, picked up a small metal shaker, and lightly dusted the meat with a coarse blend of black pepper and garlic salt. "Is he," Varus whispered, his voice trembling slightly, "is he seasoning an apex predator's snack?" "Worse, Commander," Kalen groaned, burying his beak in his primary wing feathers. "He has officially named it. Listen to the audio log." The drone's directional microphone picked up Miller's relaxed, conversational drone drifting across the desolate wasteland of Oros 4. "There you go, Sparky," Miller said, sliding a perfectly browned, sizzling piece of meat off the edge of the spatula onto a flat slate of cooled volcanic rock. "Careful, it's hot. Blow on it." The terrifying Gorgon stalker delicately, with astonishing surgical precision, picked up the searing hot morsel with the very tip of its razor-sharp mandibles, chewed twice, and let out a sound that bore an alarming resemblance to a contented sigh. Varus looked from the screen to Kalen, his multifaceted eyes wide. The survival trial manual explicitly states that a Class-9 hostile environment requires immediate defensive posture, chemical shielding, and avoidance of local fauna. Where in the academy curriculum does it cover? Culinary diplomacy. "It doesn't," Kalen said flatly. "In 4,000 years of Pangalactic history, no cadet has ever looked at an environmental horror designed to melt flesh from bone and thought, 'I bet that tastes like brisket if you baste it right.'" Before the commanders could formulate a protocol to handle the catastrophic breakdown of standard military doctrine, a red warning indicator flashed on the perimeter monitors. "Alert! Perimeter breach in Sector 7B. Multiple hostile signatures approaching." Kalen's feathers snapped to attention. "Ah, the secondary wave. The automated pack hunters have picked up the scent of the cooking fire. Finally, reality is going to intervene." On the central monitor, the camera panned outward from Miller's campsite. Emerging from the swirling, toxic fog of the ash sinks was a pack of 6 Scorpy Vipers, sleek, chitinous ambush predators that moved like liquid shadow, armed with neurotoxic stingers and a tactical coordination matrix that usually decimated military scouting squads in under 3 minutes. The pack swept down the rocky slope, hissing viciously, their razor-sharp tails whipping the air as they locked eyes on the lone human sitting by his propane stove. In the observation deck, Varus clenched his fists. This is it. Without a force field harness, he has approximately 12 seconds before. On the screen, Miller didn't even stand up. He simply paused mid-whittle, glanced over his shoulder at the oncoming swarm of apex predators, and reached down beside his camp chair. He picked up an unopened, dented metal can of industrial-grade insect repellent, a relic of Earth technology that emitted a chemical stench so vile it violated 3 separate galactic environmental treaties. Miller popped the plastic cap off with his thumb, aimed the nozzle at the charging pack of Scorpy Vipers, and depressed the trigger. A thick, hissing cloud of noxious, aerosolized citronella and synthetic hydrocarbons shot across the clearing. The moment the chemical mist hit the leading edge of the pack, the lead Scorpy Vipers froze mid-stride. Their multifaceted eyes rolled back, their aggressive hisses instantly transformed into pathetic, choking gurgles, and the entire pack executed a synchronized, ungraceful backflip before scrambling backward into the fog, wailing like kicked puppies. Miller clicked the cap back on, tossed the can onto his supply crate, and turned back to his skillet. "Stupid bugs," Miller muttered, picking up his wooden spatula again. "Every damn time." Silence settled over the observation deck once more. Supreme Commander Varus slowly leaned back into his command chair, stared blankly at the screen where Miller and his newly adopted Gorgonstalker were now peacefully sharing breakfast, and sighed. "Kalen." "Yes, Supreme Commander." "Grade him." "As a survivalist, sir." "No," Varus said, rubbing his temples. "As an intergalactic hazard, and then send a requisition order for a case of whatever that metal spray can contained. I have a feeling we're going to need it." Back on the observation deck, the silence was broken only by the low, rhythmic hum of the tactical consoles and the distant sizzling of digital bacon. Supreme Commander Varus stared at the screen, watching as the human casually offered the Gorgonstalker, now officially dubbed Sparky by the remote telemetry logs, a second strip of spiced meat. The 12-foot apex predator accepted the offering with the gentle grace of a golden retriever taking a biscuit from a toddler. "Kalen," Varus said, his voice dangerously calm. "How much time is left in the 72-hour trial window?" High Instructor Kalen tapped his claw against a glowing data slate, his feathers still ruffled in disbelief. 14 standard cycles remaining, Supreme Commander. The extraction shuttle is scheduled to touch down at LZ Alpha at dawn. And what is the status of the other surviving cadets? Kalen pulled up a secondary multi-screen grid, displaying the remaining participants scattered across the desolate expanses of Oros 4. Cadet Vrax of the Kalari hegemony is currently huddled inside a pressurized cave in Sector 2, suffering from oxygen deprivation and acute paranoia, Kalen reported, scanning the diagnostics. Cadet Tharn of the Vorn Confederacy is pinned behind a boulder in Sector 5, expending 90% of his kinetic shield energy trying to fend off a swarm of regional needle wasps. Kalen paused, looking back at the central monitor where Miller was now lazily sipping dark coffee from an enamel mug while Sparky rested its massive, armored chin in the dirt, snoring softly. "And Cadet Miller?" Varus raised an eyebrow. "Miller," Kalen sighed, "has established a permanent bivouac site, successfully domesticated a Class-9 apex predator, utilized prohibited terrestrial aerosols to rout an elite ambush pack, and is currently enjoying a mid-morning nap with his head pillowed against a living engine of biological destruction." Varus stood up from his command chair, smoothing down the front of his imperial tunic. He walked over to the reinforced observation window, looking down through the station's orbital glass at the swirling, toxic storm clouds of Oros far below. "Cancel the extraction shuttle for Sector 7, Varus ordered quietly. Kalen's crest snapped up in alarm. "Sir, you want to leave him down there? Even with his unorthodox methods, a Class-9 storm front is rolling into the ash sinks within the hour. The atmospheric pressure drop alone will crush standard organic tissue." "I am not leaving him down there, Kalen," Varus corrected, a faint, weary smirk touching the corners of his beak. "I am sending a recovery team down to escort him back, but instruct the pilot to land at least 2 kilometers away from his campsite." Kalen blinked, confused. "Why? Is the terrain hazardous?" "No," Varus said, turning back toward the exit with a slow, solemn shake of his head. "I simply do not wish to disturb the humans' barbecue, and frankly, I am not entirely certain Sparky would let us back on the ship if we woke him up." Dawn broke over the ash sinks of Oros 4, washing the jagged, toxic landscape in a sickly, jaundiced amber light. A high-altitude gale shrieked across the plains, tearing up clouds of abrasive dust and howling through the volcanic crevices like a chorus of damned souls. True to Supreme Commander Varus's orders, the Imperial extraction gunship touched down exactly 2 kilometers away from Sector 7, its heavy atmospheric thrusters kicking up a localized tempest of pulverized rock. The ventral ramp hissed open, slamming against the scorched earth. Out marched a squad of 4 elite Pangalactic Marines, hulking, heavily armored veterans clad in segmented titanium plating, their energy rifles humming with lethal, pre-charged plasma. At their head strode High Instructor Kalen, his primary wings tucked tightly against his back against the wind, clutching a computerized retrieval manifest as if it were a shield. "All right, listen up," Kalen barked into his internal comlink, his voice tight with lingering disbelief. "We are walking in, securing the human cadet, and getting out. We do not agitate the local fauna, we do not touch his cooking equipment, and under no circumstances do we make direct eye contact with whatever he has decided to adopt this week. Understood." The Marines chorused a stiff, synchronized confirmation through their helmet filters. They stepped out into the howling storm, marching in tight, tactical formation across the rocky ridge. The terrain grew steeper, the sulfurous fog thickening until visibility dropped to barely 20 meters. And then, cutting straight through the roar of the gale, came a sound that made every Marine freeze in their tracks. "Pop, hiss, sizzle." Kalen raised a hand, signaling a halt. He crept cautiously toward the edge of a jagged obsidian outcropping and peered down into a sheltered crater below. The scene waiting for them defied every known law of military survival science. In the center of the crater, completely shielded from the worst of the storm by a crude windbreak built from stacked volcanic stones, sat the green propane camping stove. The blue flame burned with steady, stubborn defiance. Resting on top of it was the seasoned cast-iron skillet, currently rendering thick, marbled strips of cured protein that filled the toxic morning air with an undeniably delicious, mouth-watering aroma. Miller sat on his overturned crate, wearing his faded canvas jacket, casually flipping the meat with his metal spatula. And curled entirely around him, acting as a living, breathing, 12-ton thermal blanket against the Oros 4 storm, was Sparky. The colossal Gorgonstalker had its massive, armored head resting comfortably across Miller's lap, fast asleep, letting out rhythmic, low-frequency rumbles that vibrated the ground beneath the Marine's boots. Miller looked up, squinting through the blowing dust at the squad of heavily armed elite soldiers standing on the ridge. He raised his tin mug in a silent, polite salute. "Morning, Chief," Miller called out, his voice carrying effortlessly over the wind. "You guys just missed breakfast, but I've got enough coffee left in the thermos if anyone wants a cup. Warning, though, it'll strip the enamel right off your teeth." Kalen stared down at the human, his beak opening and closing as his brain completely short-circuited. He looked at the multi-ton apex predator sleeping like an overgrown puppy, then down at the cast-iron skillet, and finally back at Miller. The high instructor slowly lowered his data slate, took a deep, weary breath of the garlican smoke-scented air, and tapped his comms link. "Command Center," Kalen sighed, rubbing his temples. "This is Instructor Kalen. Extraction team has made contact with Cadet Miller." "Status report," Varus's voice crackled back instantly over the channel. "Is he injured? Did the storm compromise his position? Do we need to deploy tactical support?" Kalen looked over at Marine Sergeant Vrax, who was currently staring in slack-jawed awe as Sparky cracked a single, sleepy eye open, yawned, and let out a puff of warm air that smelled faintly of rosemary. "Negative, Supreme Commander," Kalen replied, his voice flat with absolute surrender. "The cadet is currently running a localized diner out of a Class-9 combat zone, and his dog says hello." Miller stood up, carefully wiping his skillet down with a greasy rag, and patted the sleeping apex predator on its armored snout. "Come on, Sparky," Miller said cheerfully, slinging his camp stove over his shoulder like a backpack. "Let's go home. I hear the Academy cafeteria serves synthetic protein paste on Tuesdays, and honestly, after 3 days of real food, I wouldn't wish that stuff on my worst enemy."
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads.